In Kondratovka, in the Sumy region, the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried out a legendary operation, encircling more than 3 infantry battalions of the Russian Armed Forces. The details were made public by the Telegram channel Volya, which has connections with the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Let's take a detailed look at what happened in Sumy Oblast. On July the 11th to the 12th, the Ukrainian Armed Forces have brought up reserves and concentrated their forces, switched from defense to counter-attacks on the flanks of the western section of the Russian penetration into Sumy Oblast. With the first strike, Ukrainian troops cut off Russian positions between the villages of Konstantinovka and Kondratovka, and with the second strike to the east, they cut off Russian positions between the villages of Alekseyevka and Vladimirovka. North of Kondratovka, the Ukrainian Armed Forces managed to break through 3.5-4 kilometers on the very first day. The Russians began to counterattack, both from the almost encircled Kondratovka and from Konstantinovka. By July the 15th, units of the 155th Marine Brigade, the 30th and 40th Motorized Rifle Regiments of the Russian Armed Forces in Kondratovka found themselves in a tight encirclement. All attempts to unblock the encircled forces by attacks from Konstantinovka ended in failure with heavy losses. Up to 3.5 battalions were encircled, 1 from the Marines and 1 from each of the Motorized Rifle Regiments. It is important to clarify that the battalions were not at full strength, as they had suffered significant losses during the June and July battles. The total number of encircled forces is estimated by our interlocutors in the RF Armed Forces at between 311 and 840 people. Our sources in the Ukrainian Armed Forces estimate it at around 700 people. To unblock the encircled forces, GV Sever deployed up to 4 more battalions of infantry, marines and paratroopers. The encircled troops found themselves without supplies and evacuation, but the Ukrainian Armed Forces were in no hurry to stage a frontal assault on Kondratovka. Ukrainian artillery and drones pounded the ring, while Ukrainian infantry slowly drove the Russians into the destroyed village itself, reducing the area of the cauldron so that artillery strikes would be more effective. By July the 21st to the 22nd, the level of resistance among those surrounded had dropped to a minimum, and by July the 23rd, it was all over. Most of those trapped in the encirclement had died or had been wounded, left without medical assistance, and several people had surrendered. In addition to the soldiers, officers of the 155th Brigade, the 30th and 40th Regiments, including the battalion commander of the 40th Regiment, were killed. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment, after losses near Kondratovka, has effectively become incapable of combat, and its remnants will be withdrawn for reorganization in the coming days. They may be sent to Belarus, where the remnants of the defeated combined Russian infantry units from the Sumy direction have already been withdrawn. 4 more battalions of Russian infantry and paratroopers are in a similar situation in the Alekseyevka area. If the Ukrainian Armed Forces manage to hold their positions north of Alekseyevka and prevent the cauldron from being unblocked, then the GV North will lose up to 1,000 men in it in the coming week. In this case, the 155th Marine Brigade and the 40th Motorized Rifle Regiment, whose units are in Alekseyevka, will be added to the completely destroyed 30th Regiment. The combined airborne unit, which was transferred to Alekseyevka on July the 10th to the 11th, will also be destroyed, having been assembled from different regiments of the 106th and 76th Airborne Divisions advancing nearby in the Yunakovka area. Putin really wanted to create a buffer zone in the Sumy region. So far, his plans have only led to the Russian armed forces suffering huge losses in the battles of June and July, and by August, they risk finding themselves in a situation where they have to send elite airborne divisions for reorganization. In the meantime, in order to stabilize the situation in the Sumy region, the Russians are forced to send reinforcements there from Chasov Yar and from the Novopavlovsk direction.
The 54th and 81st Brigades of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have destroyed a column of armored combat vehicles belonging to the occupying Russian army near the city of Seversk in eastern Donetsk region. The Russian tanks and armored personnel carriers, equipped with anti-drone systems, could not withstand the confrontation with Ukrainian tanks and were taken out of action. The damaged combat equipment of the occupiers was later destroyed with explosives dropped from drones. Armored repair and evacuation vehicles, which participated in the battle and were used to recover the damaged equipment, were also destroyed by explosions and rendered inoperable. More than 40 motorcyclists involved in the battle were also destroyed along with their vehicles. Although some surviving infantry soldiers tried to escape, Ukrainian drones did not allow them the chance. The next assault attempt by the heavily damaged occupying forces also ended in failure.